This is a Radeon R9 Nano. It's not only a super tiny card, with a release date back in 2015, it's also a very old card. But don't let its looks and HTC view. Underneath the single fan shroud, this card is hiding advanced technology that took almost a decade to develop, and today is in such high demand that it's considered too valuable to waste on gaming GPUs. This technology literally changed the future of semiconductors. Let's disassemble it so I can show you what I'm talking about. What you are looking at is AMD's Fici GPU. At first glance it might not look like much, but if you compare it to a traditional graphics card, the differences are immediately obvious. First, Fici is missing the memory chips that usually surround a GPU. And second, right next to the GPU die we can see 4 tiny chips. The reason for this interesting design is that Fici doesn't use traditional graphics memory such as GDDR, but instead it was the first GPU to use next generation high bandwidth memory, HBM for short. And to enable the use of HBM, it was also the first GPU that implemented a silicon interposer design, which means that chips are sitting on top of another silicon chip. The use of HBM for gaming cards died with AMD's Vega generation. Today, HBM and silicon interposers are only used for very expensive HPC and AI cards. Nvidia's Hopper, AMD's MI300 and Intel's Ponte Vecchio are not only the most advanced and most HPC and AI cards. Nvidia's Hopper, AMD's MI300 and Intel's Ponte Vecchio are not only the most advanced and most expensive GPUs at the moment, they also wouldn't be possible without the use of HBM and silicon interposers. Technologies invented to make this little GPU a reality. Technologies that took a lot of engineering time and trial and error, which is why Fici might be the GPU with the longest development time ever. Let me tell you the story of how this tiny GPU invented the future. The story of Fici begins all the way back in 2007. Just 1 year after the release of the iconic 8800 GTX from Nvidia. Crysis wasn't even released yet, and the most hyped games were Stalker, Bioshock, Portal and Call of Duty 4. The development of GDDR5 graphics memory just finished, and AMD was back to the drawing board with a simple but at the same time very difficult question. How will the future of video memory look like? Simply scaling the clock speeds of GDDR5 memory wasn't feasible, as it would lead to an increasingly higher power draw, taking more and more power budget away from the GPU itself. In a fixed power world, you can't spend the majority of your power budget on the video memory, because you need that power budget to run the GPU cores itself. Memory scaling just didn't match GPU scaling. Something new was required. At the same time, form factors were getting increasingly smaller, especially notebooks. For this reason, AMD set 2 main goals for their idea of a perfect next-gen video memory: maximize bandwidth per watt and bandwidth per square millimeter at the same time. And of course, it had to be affordable enough to mass produce. With these 2 or rather 3 goals in mind, AMD engineers started their journey. It was a greenfield project, everything was possible. And one of the first realizations was that in order to increase power and space efficiency at the same time, this next generation memory needed to be built up vertically instead of horizontally like traditional memory chips. If you think the early stages of such a project are only theoretical, you are mistaken. Building prototypes was a major part of the development from an early point on. Interestingly, first proof of concept prototypes didn't even involve GPUs or any kind of new memory. Instead, AMD started with mechanical samples of a CPU and DDR3 memory. How closely could these parts be integrated? What type and connection density would be required? These early experiments quickly came to the conclusion that a layer of silicon, a so-called interposer, was needed to support high-speed interconnects, because it's faster to transfer data via silicon. Traditional memory is placed on a PCB around the GPU, and you are usually able to see the data path on the PCB with your naked eye, as they have to be very wide due to physical limitations. But if you run data path on silicon, they can be order of magnitude smaller, allowing you to run a lot more connections than you could on the PCB itself. Silicon is faster because it allows you to miniaturize, but this came with another problem. If you are placing the interposer between the package substrate and the memory or GPU, data and power connections have to go through the silicon interposer. How do you solve this problem? The solution are so-called through-silicon vias. TSVs for short. These TSVs aren't a new concept. They were invented back in the 1950s. IBM pushed the research further during the 1960s, and first integrated circuits with TSVs were built in the 1980s. At its core, TSVs are basically super small copper pillars that literally go through the silicon dies to connect layers above and below. And they were perfect for AMD's use case, especially since at around the same time new technologies like wafer thinning made TSVs much
Okay. Hello, I am someone I am patronized with. Can call me.
victory rounded out to a solid and sturdy 30. 10 out of Haywood. Thanks to unabated gang wars. One officer down, so I guess you're all screwed. Cause the NCPD will not let that go. Got another blackout in Santo Domingo. Net runners are at it again, poking holes in the power grid. While over in Westbrook, trauma teams scraping cyber-psycho victims off the pavement. And in Pacifica, well, Pacifica is still Pacifica. This has been your man, Stan. Join me for another day in our city of dreams.
Hold on. The streets are safe, you say, but what about the highways?
I'm sorry.
You heard about the shooting off the Route 1 exit, I trust. Half an hour before any response team arrived on the scene. Over 7... that I trust. Half an hour before any response team arrived on the scene. Over 7